Hello and welcome to NaMo's here, the show where we evaluate the Narendra Modi government's first year in power. Today, we put the focus on two ministries that perhaps affect the greatest number of people in this country. The Agriculture Ministry under Radha Mohan Singh and the Rural Development Ministry, which was earlier led by Nitin Gadkari and now by Birendra Singh. Joining me to talk about this are noted experts Ashok Gulati, senior agriculture economist and the former chairman of the Commission for Agriculture Costs and Prices. Also with us, Harsh Kumar Bhanwala, the chairman of NABARD, the country's leading public sector agri-credit institution. And finally, Madan Sabnavis, the chief economist of Care Ratings. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. 1 year of the government, and the question that really everyone wants to know is to get a reality check, a sense of what is happening on the ground. Is India in an agriculture crisis right now? To you first, Mr. Gulati.
Well, this crisis is not new for India. What I would say, it's a situation which must attract the attention of the policymakers. You had a bad Kharif, you had a bad Rabi, and now the spectre of El Nino is there. So anyone who is concerned with the economy where masses are engaged needs to be concerned. It's not just 1 year, it's a neglect over a number of years, and it is cumulative, and it's high time that the policymakers wake up.
Okay, high time that the policymakers wake up. Before I go to the next guest, let me ask you, Mr. Gulati, to rate the Agriculture Ministry's performance over the last 1 year. And we've been doing this consistently across ministries, so I have to request you to give us a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, although I completely agree with you that perhaps 1 year is too short a time to seek such a rating. But that's the format we are following, and I would request you for a rating.
No. We are not a rating agency. I can give you some pluses and I can give you some dormant things in the policy making. It's not a question answer that you can fill up 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. The simple thing that this time last year when the new government came in, there was a big question of whether food inflation can be tamed. And we were hovering around double digit at that time. Today nobody is talking food inflation as number one priority. The prices are still high, but the food inflation rate has almost halved. So if on that point you want to rate, well, I would say 8 out of 10. Question is that how much was the policy intervention in that, and how much was the global price effect, because global prices started tumbling. So it's a mix of all this. Now, if you want to say that the agri growth this year may fall flat, at present still they are having 1.1% as the agri GDP growth rate, which was before the unseasonal rains, and now the data that is coming that crop production will be down. It's all in nature's fury. Now, policy-wise, what policy could have done? The Modi government increased the compensation by 50%. So compared to what it used to be, it's 50% higher. Great. But is that sufficient? I'm sorry, no. So there are different aspects of this. It's not as simple as what you are thinking.
I completely,
the ministry's performance. It's a too big a sector on that.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Gulati, and your assessment is perfectly bang on. This is a difficult thing. Let me go across to Mr. Bhanwala. The point that really has come back into the public debate, and this is part of my question to you, where you will assess what has happened over the past 1 year, is also the fact that the public discourse sometimes gets dominated by the fact that you have to give bailouts and do some loan waivers. And like Mr. Gulati has recently written in a very well argued piece, that the real causes of distress are somewhere else and they need to be focused on. Mr. Bhanwala, offer us your assessment of how the situation is, what the performance has been in the last 1 year of this government and of the Agriculture Ministry.
I will talk about the developments and outrightly, first of all, I am not there to rate the ministry, as like Mr. Gulati has also said.
Right.
But let me also say that solution to some of the problems which Dr. Gulati has also highlighted, and we all know about them, is partly to be provided immediately, short run approach, and partly in long run. Normally, we have been missing in past by providing short term relief to a problem immediately. For the first time in this government, there is emphasis on long term investment in agriculture. The credit funding that we do, there are two kinds of funding of agriculture that is coming from institutions. One is the funding in agriculture, where investments get created by individuals, and second is investments for agriculture, where we create an ecosystem which is environment in rural areas and for agriculture, which will contribute to efficient leveraging of individual investments. Both are important,
Right.
and for the first time I am using the word after several years, emphasis for lending has shifted to the investment credit, because the share of investment credit, which used to be around more than 30% some 10 years ago, had declined to less
Right.
than 20%, which is a cause of concern.
Mr. Bhanwala, let me now quickly go across to Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist at Care Ratings. Madan, really, we have heard Mr. Gulati, we have heard a repeat of what has been announced by this government so far, but tell us, if you can, in terms of your assessment of how the government has handled the 2014 tailwind so far, and what do you think is likely been the approach in terms of handling the mix of unseasonal rains, the threats that we have seen, and broadly, if you can, because you are a rating agency here, if you could offer us a broad rating assessment of the Agriculture Ministry's performance.
Actually, as a rating agency, we don't really rate agriculture, but still, since you're asking me to rate, I think let's actually look at the fact that agriculture has a certain role the central government has a certain role to play in agriculture, and you also have the state governments which play a certain role. So when we are trying to evaluate what the central government is doing, it could be more on the account of policy in terms of allocations which are made, and also whether they have any kind of a long-term vision. The problem in agriculture, as Mr. Gulati had said in the beginning, is that it's something which is deep-rooted. It's a sector which has been ignored for decades. Our focus has always been on industry. It's been on capital markets and the financial markets, on FDI. We have actually ignored agriculture, and we are just paying for that. And I don't think any government will be able to turn it over in 1 year's time or even in 5 years' time. There are deep-rooted problems. There are a number of policies which have been announced which probably will work at the margin, but they're very, very short-term measures. So when we have a failure in output, to my mind, it's not the government's fault. It's just that we have not created facilities, so therefore we're going to keep suffering every time the monsoon fails. Similarly, if we're talking in terms of warehousing, you're talking in terms of marketing, these are all tall talks which have been made by the governments, but at the ground level, we don't see anything really happening. Now, this said, I would not really give credit or discredit to anybody, to the government, when inflation goes up, because when the prices of onions and tomatoes go up, it's not because of the government, and when the prices come down, I don't think it's because of the government. So if prices have come down, food inflation has come down, to my mind, it's a natural course. It's just been good luck, serendipity. That's why we are better off in terms of having better inflation numbers today. So if I have to rate the government, I would say it's probably around 6.5 out of 10, because whatever is supposed to be done, I think the government has it in place. The rest is actually still dependent upon the monsoon. We have to look for what the government is going to do in the next 4 years. Is it going to be sustained, or are we going to change direction? And what kind of support is going to be provided by individual states?
Okay, that's a fair enough assessment, and I completely agree with all of you gentlemen that this subject, the agriculture subject, is not something that can be looked at in terms of many other criteria of assessment that we usually deploy. And the sense that we get from this part of the discussion is that there have been good beginnings. But it's time for a quick break here. All of our experts, please do stay on with us to assess the situation. We also need to go to analyze what has happened as far as the rural side is concerned, the rural development part of it. We'll talk about that when we return. Welcome back to NaMo's Here. We analyze the performance of the Agriculture Ministry, but the picture cannot be complete without a fuller assessment of the Rural Development Ministry as well. Still with me are Ashok Gulati, Harsh Kumar Bhanwala and Madan Sabla. Since we spoke about agriculture, now in the backdrop of the Rural Development Ministry's recent activities, again I come to you, Mr. Gulati, first. In terms of assessing the coordination that necessarily in some ways should happen in between these two ministries, and we saw a change that also took place. We saw a minister moving out, another minister coming in. I'm not going to ask you to rate that, but ask you to provide your insight into how this crucial department as far as the rural economy is concerned, how that has performed in your assessment over the past year. Mr. Gulati, first to you.
Let me broaden the thing a little bit and count at least 5 ministries which directly or indirectly impact agriculture and the rural space. You have Ministry of Agriculture, you have Ministry of Food, you have Ministry of Fertilizer, you have Ministry of Water Resources, and you have Ministry of Food Processing. They directly or indirectly impinge on agri-food space in the country, and that is what your main concern is. The rural development, the largest chunk there goes for Manrega, which is a fallback situation. If the productive sector isn't working, then that's the lender of the last resort to give them some wages if they want to work on whatever little that is being done there, and that's the largest chunk. Now, in the other 5 ministries that I counted, the budget provision this year is 2.28 lakh crores. The problem with our system is, and including rural development if you count, the biggest chunk of resources is going as subsidies or doles. In the 5 ministries that I counted, 85% of the resources of the 2.28 lakh crores is going as food and fertilizer subsidy. Similar thing Manrega, which is not a direct intervention in the productive capacity, but more as a last resort to give something to the people. Now with that, what you are finding is we have a big cart before the horse. The productive capacity of the country, the resources going into that are very limited, whereas all the doles and subsidies and other things are piling up so much that the growth rate in agriculture really suffers from that, and we keep on doling out. I think the wisdom lies in not giving every day a fish to the person, but creating a skill and the capacity of the persons and the sector to really catch the fish. So that is a political challenge. How best we can do that, whether it is done over the next 3 years or 5 years, it can't be done 1 year. I think the biggest challenge right on the table to the agriculture and rural space is tackling food and fertilizer subsidies, which are more than 200,000 crores, 2 lakh crores plus today. And unless we tame those, make it cost effective, which will save us at least 40 to 50,000 crores, which can be invested in irrigation, and then only we can heave a sigh of relief.
Absolutely, Mr. Gulati, and that's the whole point. Before I go to Madan Sabnavis, the issue really that you're touching upon is the broader direction as far as subsidies are concerned and these doles are concerned. Madan Sabnavis, broadly in terms of the expectations that we had from this government, that it would undertake a structurally new approach with regard to this matrix of 4 to 5 different ministries that Mr. Gulati spoke about, and on the issue of doles and subsidies, do something radically different? In your assessment, has that happened? Is the glass half full, or even have no attempts been made in that direction so far?
No, I don't think too much of attempt has been made, because I think it's more a case of saying that we don't want to upset the status quo, because one should remember that this particular government came with the perception, I mean the public perception was that it may not be fair to the rural and agricultural sector, and I think that kind of a view which a lot of people had has actually been dislodged, and the government has shown its commitment to at least the continuation of the status quo. Now when you're talking of things like subsidies, I think it's the absolute numbers I would not really agree with Mr. Gulati. We need to have these kind of subsidies, especially when we're talking of a large section of people who will not be able to support themselves. The whole question is, how do I make sure they're more effective, there are less leakages? So I'm not against that number of 200,000 crores which is being spent, and that is what the government has also retained. They are mentioned about saying that they're going to streamline it, and while we all think that a direct benefit in terms of cash makes sense, to my mind there are lots of loopholes in terms of implementation. So therefore, until we make sure that we have a viable subsidy to alternative to the PDS, we should not really be jumping in, otherwise it's going to become a very messy situation. But I suppose that's not a part of the debate out here. But just maintenance of the existing status quo, I think, is a good job done by the government. At least it quashes the perception which lots of people had, saying that the government was going to concentrate on industry rather than agriculture. Now in terms of NREGA program, again, we all expected that the number would probably come down. They've retained the number of around 34,000 crores, which to my mind is not adequate. It should have been a higher number, but given the fact that we have certain fiscal constraints, the government had to take a bet of saying that if I'm going to stick to 3.9% fiscal deficit, I'll have to control all these numbers, because we should remember that as the wage in NREGA has been going up, the number of people who could be potentially covered comes down. So in terms of coverage, the NREGA program is going to cover a few number of people, especially at a time when the monsoon may not be satisfactory,
right,
and they would need to provide alternative employment to farmers. I think that could be a kind of a problem going ahead. But on the whole, again, if you have to ask me to give a rating and stick my neck out, I will again say around 6.5 out of 10.
Okay, 6.5 out of 10. Thank you so much, Madan, for that. Mr. Bhanwala, let me come to you. As an agency that has a very important and fundamental role when it comes to the rural economy through your activities, but a broader assessment really in terms of where our current situation stands. You know, I'm not going to ask you to react to things like the land bill ordinance and all the politics around it, but fundamentally on the ground, is there a sense of a revival at all that you see, both in terms of the demand that might be coming to you, and do you expect this to continue to go forward irrespective of what might happen due to the environment, due to the vagaries of the monsoon and the immediate short-term challenges which always confront us when it comes to Indian agriculture?
Before that, I would say the rural development attempt as well as agriculture development attempt, rightly said earlier, depends upon the cooperation of states and the center. So for the first time, I think there is a sincere attempt, even through Niti Aayog and other mechanisms, that this federalism should prevail. And no government, no ministry of central government on its own can really do something in a state unless the state also really chips in with the additionalities and really is with the hands-on with the state government, central government. Now that's one. It will pave the way in the long run. Second issue which I am saying is, another biggest problem of rural India is the unemployment or partial employment, or which requires reskilling. You have around 13-14% GDP from agriculture and nearly 60% people dependent on them. Average land holding size is also reducing. So we have to divert significant population from agriculture to areas other than agriculture, in rural areas only, by and large, because if they migrate to urban areas, that is going to create another problem there. And there are already existing severe limitations of services there. So reskilling initiative, skilling initiative, though has been conceived, in the years to come will deliver a
Right.
long way, I mean will contribute a long
Right.
way for delivery of, I mean for rural development in the real sense, because it is not just agriculture, in fact dependence on agriculture, over dependence on agriculture is really causing a big problem. And we don't still have, I would suggest that this land lease policies, leasing of land, because a small farmer is really very efficient farmer today. All of us know that. Various studies have pointed out that. Now today, in the absence of a formal act which really supports land leasing, this small farmer who is otherwise efficient is not able to invest, because there is no permanent solution to this. So this is one agenda I would flag off, that in the long run there has to be, while reskilling is being worked on, while federalism is being really looked very seriously, the third agenda should be also that somewhere larger land be available for productive use. And fourthly, I would again say, huge investment is required. We have seen recent rains. We need protected agriculture. We need efficient agriculture, not large scale growing of crops. We have seen in some developed areas, states like Haryana, Punjab, Maharashtra, Gujarat, there is demand for poly houses now. Enterprises are coming forward. Now if we can really encourage this kind of protected agriculture and efficient agriculture, at least some crops which can be grown there in an efficient manner would help us contain inflation in a sustainable manner in the long run. And also distress to the farmer.
Absolutely, Mr. Bhanwala, 2 points that you made, the 2 points that you make about land leasing as well as more efficient agriculture, those are completely well taken. We are completely out of time, but even then I'm going to quickly ask you, Mr. Gulati, to talk about the irrigation aspect, something that we didn't cover. If you could very quickly talk about what is that one key thing that you expect needs to be done, that you would want to be done as far as irrigation is concerned.
You know, if your holding size is so small, 1.15 hectares, then the only way to make it viable is to raise productivity. So the first thing that they would need is assured irrigation, good quality seeds, and only then fertilizer applications can raise productivity. I think one lesson that I would leave on the table, Prime Minister has gone to China, and China produces 600 million tons of food grains from a lesser area than ours, cropped area, and we are at 251. What is it that China is doing? Their productivity is almost double than ours. Can't we do it? And their holding size is half of ours. I think if one lesson we can learn from China, it's not about the electronics and other things, how agriculture productivity can be doubled, and that will eliminate the poverty from this country, and that will be the biggest game changer for this country.
One of the most eye-opening statements that you have made, Mr. Gulati, with regard to the comparison with China as far as land holding and productivity is concerned, and the moot point therefore is that ultimately Indian agriculture is dependent on water, whether it be the monsoons or whether it be policy interventions to increase the availability of irrigation through the year. Thank you so much, Mr. Gulati, Mr. Bhanwala and Madan Sabnavis for your time today to discuss what have been the achievements and the pitfalls, if any, on the agriculture and rural development economy side in the first year of the Narendra Modi government. That's all we have on this edition of NaMo's Year. Thank you for watching.